to do, and what's in your heart, and why you are here.
Great. Well, my name is Klaus Nemso. I just moved to Hong Kong from London. My specialty is around virtual worlds and how you can use immersive 3D spaces to business and to communication in general. And that's how I think I got to Culturemondo, because Gino from Hong Kong, we spoke about virtual worlds and those kinds of things, and he invited me to come here. And I'm very pleased to be here. It's a very interesting event. I guess sort of two observations that I would have. One is that I think this forum is designing the way that culture and heritage will be experienced by future generations or by people who are today young people. And my observation is that those people use technology very, very different. They grow up with a technology that allows them to communicate and to collaborate in very fluid and extremely fast ways. They do multitasking and all those kinds of things. So perhaps they need to be consulted more and involved in the design process. So for example, technology might allow to do a virtual museum. And this is perhaps how a body like this would think about it, because we're used to museums. That's the way we do experience culture today. But perhaps with future technology, the constraints of a physical museum are not necessary. But this body, without consulting kids, might design a virtual museum that looks exactly like a museum, almost like the first TV shows were radio presentations in front of a camera kind of thing. So I think involving, as a consulting body, children, young people, teenagers, perhaps even with some very good design ideas, how they would want to experience culture and heritage in the future. That I think would be sort of one really important point. And the second observation that I would have is this is a great 3-day event, and nothing will replace that. And it's all the social things going on at the experience. But in addition, I don't know quite how the body works, but it might be that one could use technologies to stay in touch much more closely throughout the year. And not only could this be wikis and forums and asynchronous communication, but perhaps it could also be a virtual unconference. Perhaps something like every month you could get together in a virtual space, but in real time, as opposed to, or in addition to asynchronous blog posts and so forth, Flickr posts and so forth, you could get together virtually in a virtual world for half an hour every month. And so you could have an unconference going into perhaps into depth into more topics over the year, which might allow you to build up interesting topics and perhaps to test topics for the 3-day event. But also, that's sort of the preparation for that. But also after the event, you might find that during this 3-day event, you didn't have enough time to go into particular topics of interest because you didn't expect they would be so interesting. So you could then use those post-conference virtual events to perhaps go into more depth in interesting topics. So both of those in preparation and afterwards. And this would be something that would be in some way similar to a real event where you get together in real time, so you have discussions, you share material and ideas and so forth. And perhaps then if you combine those two thoughts, because perhaps that would be an idea of bringing in young people in this virtual space. So those are sort of to involve young people more in the design of cultural experiences. And they might actually, one could learn perhaps also a little bit in terms of speed and a non-bureaucratic, very fresh approach. Why don't we just do it that way? Because in bodies that are involved in government institutions, sometimes one tends to take constraints and the time it takes to do certain things for granted. And sometimes I'm surprised how fresh kids take something that doing a video with Final Cut Pro, which an adult would think this is I need to do 3 weeks of training. Kids take these things, they might not be perfect, but within a few hours they work with things that adults wouldn't think were possible. So taking sort of this fresh approach and do things perhaps much faster might also be something we could learn from young people. Well, I guess for those areas where you could at least create internet access and ideally broadband access, and perhaps those might be access points in schools or public libraries. So in countries where perhaps the broadband and PC infrastructure isn't economically feasible in the short term in terms of home penetration, but perhaps you could put it into those public spaces, then I think absolutely you could get very interesting ideas and new concepts and perhaps learn about issues that people have locally, because I'm sure they would pick up the use of that technology very, very quickly. The other point to do that perhaps is just to use mobile devices. So even current low-end mobile phones with SMS, you could, if you construct it in the right way, collect ideas and criticism and points just through simple SMS mobile phones. And of course, the next generation, hanging somewhere between an SMS mobile phone and a high-end internet PC, would be sort of mobile intelligent devices, smartphones and so forth, that are still cheaper perhaps than full-blown laptops. And I think that would be a very interesting way perhaps to get people with, in more remote countries in terms of infrastructure and get them involved and take advantage of some of that creativity and that creative potential that's probably out there.
And so far, have you identified any tools or things that are useful to do what you are most passionate about?
Well, yeah, there are a number of tools on the virtual space. For example, there's, Second Life is quite well known, although usually it's much less known for what it's really good, which is in conferences, academic get-togethers. There is an open source movement in the virtual world called OpenSim that I think next year will become sort of industrial strength and could be used in much more interesting ways. And then, in fact, there is a platform that Gino and the Polytechnic University in Hong Kong is working on that is very, very interesting and might be, a very interesting instrument to use for this forum as well.
I think you really add very interesting and creative ideas into this process. I wish that you contribute more into this forum, and then because I know that Culturemondo is also looking at new ways and new models.
Perhaps tomorrow, when I'll be speaking at part of Gino's presentation about company that I'm involved with, it actually creates a virtual museum about Chinese ancient culture. That might be a discussion point to bring some of the other ideas, how perhaps to use these kinds of technologies. That could be a discussion point we could have tomorrow around that.
Thanks.
Great.
Thanks for being here. It's good to have you.
Pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.